Good morning, everybody. I, I had some requests by some people to talk more about folk Catholicism. What is it? Why I like the idea, and why, if you're a Catholic, or even if you're not a Catholic, if you're just interested in Christianity in general, why it's an actual good spiritual path within a sort of subgenre of Abrahamic faiths to put yourself into. Well, we really need to talk about what Catholicism is to begin with. This will be a kind of a longish video. Now, Catholicism didn't really start with Constantine and the Edict of Milan and the migration of the Roman Empire, the Roman pagan empire, towards being a Christian empire around the 300 AD. That particular brand of Christianity was a kind of a Jewish radicalism. It was a Jewish um, fanatical sect that had no that well they were when I say Jewish, it was an offshoot of Judaism. It wasn't, it wasn't. It's interesting, the history of it. It probably came out of the Zealots were a breakaway Jewish sect that had two agendas in the Holy Land, as they call it, in Judea. And that was to break away from the Roman Empire and also dismantle Jewish, the rabbinical power structure in Jerusalem, which had basically, they believed, had brought about the occupation of Judea by the Romans Empire. Now, Jerusalem was a very ethnically diverse place at that time. When people say that stupid thing like, Jesus was the only white guy in the Bible is full of things of Greeks and Armenians and so on who lived and Romans who lived in Jerusalem, so in Judea. But that basically, the temple in Jerusalem at the time of the Roman occupation until the Jewish revolt was essentially a trading floor. It was that story of Jesus overturning the tables of the money changers in the temples. That's probably almost certainly, no, not Jesus himself, but the actual story. Yeah, that's true. There was an element within Judaism that was, and then other sects of Judaism, like the Maccabees and stuff like that, who were very much against the concept of the temple being used as a trading floor. In tandem with the Romans were only too happy to facilitate and protect this, because they were creaming off taxation and stuff like that. But they were funding the garrison in Jerusalem. This is the thing: they were funding the garrison in Jerusalem directly because through the actual temple, and this created tremendous resentment among, you know, Jews who didn't like the fact that their religion was being used as a money thing, and also paying for the Roman occupation. It was the same thing as like during the British occupation of Ireland, especially at the beginning of the 20th century, that people resented having to pay taxes to Dublin Castle so they could throw the black and tans and the auxiliaries at us. That's exactly how the Jews felt in time. So because of that, there was a sort of like a dissociation between mainstream rabbinical Judaism and what we would call these sects: Maccabees, Zealots, and the Essenes, whoever they were. But we don't know an awful lot about them. But they were still a sect that existed that had a big sort of spiritual influence at the time. So after the Jewish revolt and this temple was sacked by the Romans and they took everything out of it, the these Jews, these sort of like disenfranchised Jews were scattered all over the Roman Empire, and eventually made their way to Rome itself for employment, for work, and that kind of thing. And but they were still radicalized. It's very, it's like the jihadists today, and their nature impressed. Their they were tough and hard. They were a tough, hard bunch. And initially, the Romans were like, who the fuck are these guys? And then the Roman establishment realized that they'd make a great that Christianity, that branch of Christianity, which is really kind of Second Temple rabbinical Judaism, Judaism with Jesus, basically, or the Messiah had arrived, to become the army. And so they migrated Christianity into the Roman army, using the feast days of the previous cult. Well, they didn't replace it completely. It took time, which was Mithraism, and that's why Jesus is born on the same day as Mithra is born to a virgin like Mithra, and his physical attributes are Dionysius. So within Rome, you had two secular pagan cults. You had the Mithra Persian military cult among the army men, and you had the which was a pagan religion, but it was monotheistic. And then within Rome itself, you had Dionysius, the Dionysius Bacchus type look, and the look of Dionysius is physical attributes of long black hair, long brown hair, wavy hair, a long beard. Those looks became what you think is Jesus today. So when you look at those images of Jesus and you see that archetype we all grew up with, you're looking at Dionysius. So this is how Catholicism came about. This You had an initial Jewish takeover of a spiritual sort of, well, I wouldn't call it takeover. It's sort of like what's the word? Facilitation by the Roman government establishment to encourage the growth of Judaism in the army, and it became very successful. On top of that, you had the eventual, you had basically the aftermath of Justinian and the rest of the whole thing, and the split that led to the Roman Byzantine Empire. So you had the Western Empire and the Eastern Empire. Now, when it became the Eastern Empire, that's really when Catholicism started. It migrated away from Judaism and back towards this, what we would call Orthodox Catholicism. And then there was a split again, and the Orthodox Church went one way, and the Vatican moved to Rome. So that's how Christianity came about in Europe. Okay, now it spread through the Roman Empire as far as Ireland. We now know that the Romans had an occupation in Ireland. It wasn't probably a military occupation, but they were here. They had a sizable city in Drummonagh, just north of Dublin, and Roman coins and everything have been found all over this country, and even graves and Roman houses, villas. So not all over the country. And we had two Romanized Celtic tribes, the Menappi and the Belgae. Belgae, from Belgium, Belgium and Holland. They were in Ireland too as well. And so you had this thing where you had Romanized tribes in Ireland, say, I'm just going by Irish stuff, because our folk Catholicism is central, it's very powerful in Ireland, it's central to Ireland. So you had the Belgae and the Menappi in Ireland, who were already Romanized through, you see, this whole thing that Irish were barbaric before St. Patrick is such a pile of crap. And then you had Roman occupation in Drummonagh, north of Dublin, which was probably a kind of a Hong Kong thing, where it was a Roman business centre, and there would have been legionnaires and stuff there, but there was no issue with the locals. It was purely business. They would have been buying things like horses from the Irish, and all kinds of things, silver. The Irish were very good at making silver things, and the Romans would have brought in things like wine and olive oil. It's just like the world is, the world back then was just like now, and that kind of thing. So the Irish and the English Catholics and the Southern Europeans developed a form of Catholicism, especially in Ireland and England, because, and it would have been Scotland and Wales at the time too, that we were so far from Rome that the Vatican didn't, and the papacy was very, very far away. You know, this is when, when St. Malachi went from, Ulster to visit the Pope in Rome. I mean, that was an arduous, long journey across, pagan Europe, which would have been where the Saxons and the Jutes and all the other pagan tribes still remained, and the Franks too, and uh, and the Goths and all that kind of thing. And so Ireland was very, very far from Rome. So the local people had, they'd learned about Christianity through almost certainly Romans, and that's how you learned in England as well. And because they were so far away from Rome, if there was an edict by the Pope or a papal bull, they might not know about it for 10 years, or if the Pope issued some kind of thing, they might not know about it for 10 or 20 years. So, in the meantime, as they migrated Christianity into their paganism, they developed what we would call today folk Catholicism. And that would be things like they still went to the holy wells, which would have been from Druid times, the Druid wells, and they still would have celebrated the pagan holidays. They would have built, particularly in England, very common in England, Christian places of veneration upon previous pagan sites. This happened in Ireland, but not to the same extent. Where it really happened in Ireland was wherever there's a round tower. The round towers were pre-Christian. I'm absolutely convinced of that. And they built ecclesiastical centres next to. Thank you very everybody. I got on my glasses, but I can't read anything. But thank you, and for your kindness. And the ecclesiastical centres grew up around it. It makes sense, like 'cause people were going there anyway. So you had this situation develop where people were Catholics in places like the Basque region of Spain, southern Italy, Sicily, even because in the roads, it could still take years, and it also people back then had the same feeling of, Italians in sort of the regional areas would have had the same feelings towards the central government in Rome that people say in, Iowa in America have towards Washington D.C. It's so far away, I don't care. I don't trust them. I'm continuing, I'm living my life the way I want. So, but especially in Britain and Ireland, which were, Christianized way before lots of Northern Europe, mainly because of sea routes made access to them much easier, and the Romans had a very good merchant navy as well as a military navy. And both Tacticus and Cola said that Roman merchant navies, the Roman Navy were very familiar with Irish ports, so that tells you the kind of trade that was, and ideas were flowing back and forth just like today. So this involved, so you, let me, so say the fourth or fifth century A.D. You're a Christian in Ireland, Scotland, Wales, and England. What is your veneration like? Okay. Well, you go down to you go down to the holy well, and you might say a prayer, a Christian prayer, and you might do it on or venerating, say, Minerva, who's Athena. In Chester in England, there is a shrine. I have a video on this channel of Minerva in a children's playground in near the city centre. So with her owl and everything, and it's badly worn though. Later puritanical Christians probably had a go at it with hammers and stuff. This would be after the Protestant Reformation. So you would have went down there. You would have got the holy water for cures. So to bring it back home and spiritually protect the home, or put it, if your child had a sore stomach, you would rub it on the stomach, and have the statue of Minerva, but very common, Hecate. Hecate was a very strongly venerated pagan goddess who was always present in and around holy wells. Now, the English word for a witch was called a Hecate, and that comes directly from Hecate. And it wasn't until the Anglo-Saxon, invasion or migration, or whatever you want to call it, that the Low Germanic term Wicca came into common usage for a witch in England, exclusively England. And from that, the word Wicca, witch, entered into the English language. But up until the 1700s, in Catholic parts of England, such as Lancashire, which was a big, strong Catholic holdout in post-Reformation England, a witch was still called a Hecate. Now, when you travel around Ireland and you see the statues of the Virgin Mary at the crossroads, well, they were originally statues of Hecate. Some, apparently, and in England they had them as well. The crossroads are seen in magical intersections, and to protect the crossroads would have a statue of Hecate. Over time, the statue of Hecate or Athena, or in Ireland, very common Saint Bridget. They'd have a Saint Bridget. They'd burn candles and make little ceremonial fires to Saint Bridget, Bríd, the pagan goddess. This migrated into the statue of the Virgin Mary. Virgin Mary was an invented individual, an invented. Think about her as a kind of a migratory goddess. You had within pagan societies a binary matriarchal, patriarchal system where, if there's a man and a woman on earth, there's a man and a woman in heaven, This is why the tranny thing going on right now is directly connected to Abrahamism. That's the irony of it. It's pure patriarchy, that women shouldn't even exist anymore. So, they knew this. The Christians were very clever people, and they said, well, we have to give them a female goddess. I'm Jesus' mother. We'll give them that. Say that, and her name was Mary and Marian and all that. That she'll replace Hecate, and she'll replace Diana, not Diana, Minerva, and that kind of thing. And it worked beautifully. So over time, the little statue of Hecate, or the little fire of Bríd, was replaced with a statue of the Virgin Mary, but the people still went to the holy wells. Okay. Now, that would have been the default version of Catholicism in Ireland until about the 1950s, when the Catholic Church, through the bishops here, particularly after and in England's a different story, in Scotland and Wales because of the Reformation, so I can only go by Ireland, but it would have been Ireland would be very similar to Spain, Portugal, and Italy. That's why they call Ireland a Mediterranean country trapped in the wind and rain. That's a very true statement. Culturally, the Irish and Italians particularly are very similar, and they've got very similar ideals in the kind of the cultural trajectory of both of them. And so this is why Americans, Protestants, deliberately drove a wedge between Irish Americans and Italian Americans in immigrant neighborhoods, because they didn't want them coming together to realize how similar they were, because that already happened with the Irish. The Irish in America would marry Bavarians. Again, they were Catholic, so there's a lot of similarities there. They're married, so German and Irish mixed blood, but nowadays it's different. I mean, Italians and Irish mixed together fine, but in the old days, they used to deliberately encourage things, except for the mafia. The mafia used to, they were very happy to do with Irish and Germans and all that kind of thing. But, so you had a situation where that was the default thing until a more ecclesiastical, canonical version of Catholicism came along, ironically with Vatican II. You see, the Latin Mass was celebrated until the late 1960s, and then a more formal version of Catholicism from, say, 67 on took over. And ironically, the church started to die. Why? Because they took the pagan magic out of it, the ancestral roots of it. And I think that's, if you were to describe a phrase to sum up folk Catholicism, it would be ancestral roots, because it goes back to a very, very ancient time, a very, very ancient time, and it was carried through. And Catholic, even to this day, even post Vatican II and post the Eucharistic Congress in the 1930s, Catholics were, the Catholic clergy did not have no particular issue with people going down to pagan sites, and once they don't become pagans again, but they don't mind it. I mean, it's like that, and that was Ireland. That was Irish Catholicism, and that's why in that in the John Bean Keane play, uh, the field, the speech, the Catholic priest gives the speech to the American visiting, and he says, don't for a second fool, fool yourself into believing these people are Christians." He goes, "Just scratch that surface, and there's a pagan right underneath the skin," and that's true. And you would have got that in Sicily and the Basque region, and the northern regions of people like Portugal and southern Italy, and in Anatolia, and in Turkey, Greece, that part of the world. And although they weren't Orthodox, but it'll be very similar, very, very similar. And that's so. What if someone said to me, what if I was a folk Catholic today? What would I do? You wouldn't have anything to do with the Vatican. That's the first thing. So you wouldn't have anything to do with the Pope and what he says. You wouldn't pay any attention. You would have no. You wouldn't make a pilgrimage. You know the way many Catholics are kind of expected, if they can afford it, to make a pilgrimage to Rome. You wouldn't do that. You wouldn't be interested in that. That wouldn't be your thing. That would be a centralized political structure in your mind. Catholicism to you would be, you would say prayers, you would venerate Jesus Christ in the kind of New Testament sense. You wouldn't have an interest in the Old Testament. You would just purely be that the Old Testament would be a Presbyterian Christian thing, like particularly Lutheranism and Calvinism, and not so much Anglican, but Lutheranism and Calvinism, and that kind of thing. And you would go to your holy wells, get, look for what they call modern cures, folk medicine. You would, if you were going to attend mass, you would go to the Latin mass. The Latin mass is what you would go to if you want to. But you don't have to. But no, you wouldn't have confession. Confession would be seen as a papist incursion, a Jesuit's spying ring. You would have sex before marriage. You would have children before marriage. Your private life would be outside the domain of the Vatican's Humanus Vitae. You would live according to natural law. You definitely wouldn't need the Ten Commandments. I mean, anyone who needs the Ten Commandments is something. They're either a psychopath or there's something not right there. You need a document to tell you not to kill people. These are innate natural law things. But the good news is folk Catholicism is on the rise, and where it's on the rise in places like Mexico. The Mexicans, you know, when the Germans ran that country for a while, and Americans too, they went kind of like very Vatican-y. But ever since in the last, say, 100 years, Mexico has returned strongly. And that's why you have like the Day of the Dead and Santa Muerte and all these kind of things. It's also why you have the black Madonnas in Sicily, in places like that. This is Cali. This is Cali. This is also why Hindus, not all Hindus, but like Hindus in India, don't consider Catholics to be Christians or Abrahamics. They consider them to be pagans because of all the saints. My friend Shifa O'Donovan, who has a fantastic blog, a wonderful writer, she has written extensively on this, on Hindus visiting Lourdes, which not Lourdes, Fatima in Portugal, which was also visited ironically by Muslims as well at one point in the 80s, but because of a belief that it was this kind of fairy tale about Fatima, a Muslim princess who converted to Catholicism, and it was a big deal in Iran. But the so that's the folk Catholicism is not a million miles from Hinduism, and there's very strong emphasis on the saints. In the saints would be seen as kind of like semi gods, and they would have attributes. Like Saint Bridget is the saint of the, or the saint. I'm going to hyphenate, saint goddess of the home, of the sanctity of the home, the heart fire. The This is why it's so popular among women. It's about taking care of the home. It's looking after the family. That would be Saint Bridget. You would have, Saint Christopher, Santa Christus. He would be the patron saint of travelers, and he would be very similar to Odin, in that he looks after the traveler. Odin moves along the earth, and he would also be similar to Ganesh, who removes obstacles towards your trajectory, towards your destination. You see, the saint thing is a big thing. In Ireland, Saint Winifred was a big saint, and still is with some people, connected to healing. And you've seen my video about her shrine, this beautiful shrine in Flintshire in North Wales in Holywell. And so and you go to Saint Winifred's, like it's a basilica really. They build a basilica around the holy well, and there's all carvings of pilgrims who came, and the distances you see: Sligo 1804, Donegal 1820, and that was somewhat that was an from here in Sligo. Back then, to get to Dublin was an arduous journey. A week it might take you, because there was only coaches and carts. Or this is before the canals were even built, and the roads were terrible. And they wouldn't go straight. They'd been landed to connect different towns. So they had to get to Dublin, and then from Dublin they had to take a ship to Holyhead, or Liverpool. Well, it would have been Chester back then was the main port, and then make their way to Flintshire. These were caminos. This was the Camino, and it may be for themselves if they have an illness, and also a lot of the healing would take place because they would go on the mystical journey to get the water from Saint Winifred's. And it's a beautiful thing. Or someone they loved was sick, and they were going to get the water from Saint Winifred, and also, and along the way, they would stop in Kildare, and they would, like where Saint Bridget's Fire is, and they would go to Saint Patrick's Well in Nassau Street in Dublin, and then when they landed in England, they would visit and so there were pilgrimages, healing journeys, and caminos. And that's another thing of the thing. So, like, you have like these Michael and Mary lines in England and those kinds of things, and these lay paths. And you have like the St. Bridget path in Ireland, where so pilgrimage, like going to the Ganges in the Hindus, is big in folk Catholicism. And the pilgrimage is not to Rome to venerate the Pope, it's to achieve internal spiritual development by going to, like, Flintshire and the Holy Well in Wales. And that's folk Catholicism in a nutshell. There's no real Bible. You're inspired. There's the catechism you learned in school about, those of you who were raised Catholic like myself, you were given catechism books in school, and they were called things like Good News for Mankind. Remember them? Good News for Mankind. And they were just basically how the life of Jesus inspires good works. And that was it. So you didn't get any, like, Second Temple rabbinical shite. You didn't get the first five books of the Torah, like you do, say, in Presbyterianism as the central focus. Not Presbyterianism, Lutheranism and Calvinism. And that's folk Catholicism. It sounds very nice, doesn't it? This is why it was so successful, because it didn't declare war on the pagan traditions, and that's why we have Christmas and Easter's Ostara, and all this kind of Yule and everything else, All Saints' Day, so on. And it sounds lovely, doesn't it? And that's why it was so successful and lasted for so long. And you also had within folk Catholicism a better standard, and it's big in Germany as well, in Bavaria. Like it's people forget that Germany has a big Catholic minority, and so folk Catholicism is big in Bavaria. And a lot of it is things like the Latin Mass, the we don't need the Pope, and again religious science, Camino type things, and this is why people. This is why it lasted, and why it has a It's romantic, isn't it? There's a certain element of it's a real romance to it. It's romantic, and you're carried back to things like the Grail mysteries. Why the fuck would you want to be mauling a pair of rosary beads in some cold fucking church, listening to some paedophile at the altar, going on about, you will be judged at the end of the world for your sins and all this crap, telling you to step into a box and not even paying attention to what you're saying or having a discussion about the spiritual crisis you might be under, and then going, three Hail Marys and an act of contrition. Now, fuck off. Next. Why would you want to do that when you could say, well, let's go to Spain and we'll go to this. Well, let's on our summer holidays, let's do the Camino to Santiago, or let's do one in Mexico. There's lots of them in Mexico, and this in the countryside. Or let's, even in America, there's religious paths. Isn't it lovely? Isn't it lovely? And at Christmas we go to Latin midnight mass. Suddenly you go from being in a cold, damp thing where a guy is like a career Vaticanist is bullshitting you. I don't know why it ended the stream then. The Jesuits are on to me. There's another thing. There's no Jesuits involved, and so you could be a faux Catholic thing. Say, let's do the Camino, and so you could be a faux Catholic thing. Say, let's do the Camino to Santiago, and we go on a hike across northern Spain. And we stop at the holy wells and the shrines on the way. Let's go to Ireland and we'll hike across Kildare and the Dublin Mountains to St. Bridget's. Let's go, and they're all, let's go to somewhere in Mexico down in Cancun. We'll stop at the whole, and this, and Saint Christopher will protect us, and we'll meditate on their meanings and their lives. Do you remember when I was in Sri Lanka, and I met this? I was at the Stargate near, I can't remember the name of the city now, near the capital, the Buddhist capital, and I got talking to a Hindu gentleman there. You've all seen the video, and he was telling me about what he was meditating on, and he was meditating on his past lives and the meaning of his existence. And he said to me, "Why don't you ask for a wish?" Now you see, that's Hinduism is so similar to Ireland, like the Irish folk Catholicism. There's so much in common. So that's the thing, that's if there's a local holy well or a religious shrine or something, and the folk, because of this lack of power. I said, as soon as I said Jesuits, it goes off. The phone is overheating today because it's very humid. And if I start the fan, the air conditioning in here, you won't be able to hear me. It's so noisy. I'll just open the car door here so if you hear my friend Leroy or someone comes over to talk to me, I'm not a weirdo. But yeah, that's it. So there you go. That's folk Catholicism. I hope that cleared that up for you. If I wasn't a pagan, you see, like, I'm very happy being a pagan. But if I wasn't a I do incorporate, when I go to the holy wells, the Christian places, I mean, I light the candles in the churches. It's a right kind of church. If it's a small, I show reverence inside the old Christian places too, just like I go to Hindu temples. You know, I mean, being a pagan, you're freed of a lot of the dogma. So this is why you go to India, and people are, you'll see as many pictures are in Sri Lanka, and especially in the Tamil regions, you'll see as many pictures of Jesus as you will of Krishna, Buddha, you know, Vishnu or Ganesh, because they all see them as the same thing. They incorporate other belief systems into them. If you go into the Hindu temples in that part of the world, in the forecourt, not in the temple itself, you'll see a little Christian sign with a statue of the Virgin Mary, and you're next to a Buddhist shrine, because it all counts, and that's how I am. I was looking through my stuff yesterday, and I found a laminated card to the hymn to Satan. And I discovered that when I was about 17, and I used to carry the hymn to Satan around me, because I used to get, it was terrible here in Ireland during the sectarian war, and you would be watching the news every night, and you'd hear about people being killed because they were Catholic or Protestant in the wrong neighbourhood, and it used to deeply upset me growing up. It traumatised me. And so I met some Satanists when I was in my late teens, and they taught about the hymn to Satan. That if you say the hymn to Satan, you see what would happen was you'd have, like, say someone killed in Ulster because they were Catholic or they were a Protestant, and so what would people do? Well, they were killed to feed the desert demon, right? And so people would rush to the churches and double insult their dead by venerating or asking the help from the desert demon that led to their murder of their children. So the Satanists, and I'm very glad I met these Satanists, because they were all good people that gave me a good knowledge. They told me that the hymn to Satan is a good one in the face of Abrahamic evil. So I used to carry the hymn to Satan around in laminate in my wallet, and if there was a jihadist attack or something like that, or I mean, the last time I used, I recited it was, oh God, it was in Germany in 2018, and that was for a ritual I was doing. But before that, as a kind of it was when the Bataclan happened in Paris, the massacre. It's instead of thanking the desert demon um, for killing people in the name of his sectarian holy wars, what you do is you 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 hold up an affront to him by invoking the aspect of the shaitan, the opposer. No, I'm not going to thank you for a bombing that happened in Belfast. No, I'm not going to thank you for a shooting that happened in Beirut. No, I'm not going to thank you for blah, 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 what happened at Waco. Blah, 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 fucking blah. No, no, I'm going to issue the hymn to Satan. I'm going to read it aloud. And it would be very healing. Very, very healing. I wasn't a Satanist. I'm still a pagan, but I incorporated that. Just like I said, I go to a holy well or a Christian shrine, and I will be respectful. And if it has the right energy, that's it. So, those of you who are Catholics and interested in folk Catholicism, or even maybe you're a Protestant and you're interested in it, or anything, you're nothing right now. Yeah, I would say go for it. If you're interested, give it a try anyway. And if it works for you, if anything, it gets you out of the house. It gets you meeting. It makes you feel there's it's a bigger purpose to your life. And these mystical journeys, these caminos, you should always there was no difference between a camino and say the holy paths that the Nordic pagans went across in Uppsala in Sweden back in the day. That's the whole thing. I guess it comes down to cut out the middleman and go right to the God force. So look after yourself, sanguine gnosis, and have a lovely weekend. And I hope you got something from this, and you've learned a bit more. And if you're interested in that thing, you can now go explore it in different ways. All the best. Take care.